Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I express my thanks to the Home Secretary for bringing this bill forward with such pace and alacrity. But also, can I take this opportunity to pay tribute to Figen Murray for her tireless campaigning, and I know she and her husband and other campaigners join us in the chamber today. And of course, it's also appropriate that we pay tribute to her son, Martyn, who was murdered whilst going to the Manchester Arena in 2017 to watch a concert. Murdered alongside 21 other innocent victims. And it is, of course, in that tragic context that we find ourselves in the House today considering this legislation. As the Home Secretary has said, this legislation enjoys cross-party support, and of course from the opposition benches we are supportive of the aims and aspirations of this bill, and I'm grateful to her for recognising at the dispatch box the work that was done, particularly in pre-legislative scrutiny, to make sure that this bill has the best chance of navigating through its parliamentary stages and being concluded in a manner which achieves the dual purpose of keeping people safe whilst also supporting the music and entertainment industry of which we are so proud. When I met Ms Murray ahead of the general election, I said, perhaps rashly, that I was confident that irrespective of the outcome of the forthcoming general election, that this bill would be brought forward. I'm very glad that the Home Secretary did not put me in an awkward position having made such a commitment, but I felt confident at the time I would be proven right, and indeed she and her ministers have proven me right, and I'm very pleased on that one occasion thus far she has done so. Martyn's Law was in both our party's manifesto at last general election, and it is important that this measured and well thought through, and I'm sure properly scrutinised piece of legislation makes it through the House, because, as she says, the threat picture is complex, it is evolving, and it is enduring. And terrorists choose to attack a broad range of locations. And as the Home Secretary states, they choose to attack in a manner and in locations which maximise the detrimental impact on our way of life. And the protection of our way of life is, I suppose, in many ways just as important as protection of life itself. And because of the range of potential targets, it is right that the bill proposes a range of premises to be better protected and be ready to respond in the event of a terrorist attack. Whilst at the same time, the government has to think very carefully when regulating in this way to make sure that we recognise you cannot regulate away all risks, and that we should regulate when and where it provides greater safety to the public, but ensuring that we don't create a false sense of security or impose a cost so high that venues are unable to comply and therefore fail to reduce the risk. And it's therefore, I think, appropriate that we look at the impact assessment produced by the government and recognise that the new regulations will affect an estimated 155,000 small businesses with venue capacity between 200 and 799 people, and that will impose an average cost upon them of around £330 a year. And the regulations will also impact around 24,000 larger venues with a capacity of 800 and above, with an average cost of around £5,000 a year. When I was Home Secretary, I looked at ways of reducing as much as possible the burden on the industry, and whilst doing so, ensuring that those with the broader shoulders, as it were able to bear the largest load, whilst protecting the smaller venues. And I therefore welcome the lighter touch approach that has been put forward, particularly in the standard tier. Again, whilst in government, we also looked at the case to raise the standard threshold beyond 200 to around 300. And I can see that in the proposals put forward, 200 was the capacity that was settled upon. Now, clearly, as the bill goes through its scrutiny process, questions will be asked about whether 200 or 300 or lower or higher is the appropriate figure. And it is right that those questions are asked, and members across the House should feel at liberty to probe the government on the thinking and rationale, because this is about balance. It is about making sure that people are safe, but also making sure that venues stay viable. And so, in recognition of the important but novel approach that is being taken, what thought has the government given to a feedback process whereby the implementation can be assessed and thresholds adjusted if needs be? And so the government may consider implementing the enhanced tier in a staged process, learn lessons before implementing fully in the standard tier. And certainly I would be more than happy to discuss this with her across the dispatch box, in committee, or indeed elsewhere. Turning to the establishment of the new regulator, I welcome the government's intention that the regulatory functions of Martyn's Law will be delivered as a new function of the Security Industry Authority. But what assurances has the Right Honourable Lady had from the SIA regarding their readiness for this? Because, as I said, including the standard tier venues, we are looking at nearly 200,000 venues. And we want to make sure that this legislation is effective and not just on the statute books gathering dust.
I wonder if my right I'm extremely grateful to my Ron for giving away, and I'm mindful of his last point and the early one he made about how smaller businesses can cope with these new requirements. It seems to me part of that is about increasing on the part of their staff awareness and understanding of the threat, and the training that the Home Secretary spoke about will be vital in that respect. I wonder if my honourable friend might agree that one of the ways of minimising the cost will be for those umbrella organisations to coordinate some of that training in organisations big and small to improve staff understanding of risk and how it can be countered.
My right honourable friend makes an important point, and with so much of legislation of this nature that enjoys cross-party support, there are opportunities to discuss the most effective way of implementing what is a universal desire to get good and effective but not overly onerous legislation on the books. And I think sometimes members can feel a bit reticent asking challenging questions for fear that it comes across as seeking to undermine the work of legislation. And I know in conversations that he and I have had that that is absolutely the opposite. But there are opportunities, for example, where the requirement of the enhanced tier venues to get their house in order could be done in close coordination with local venues in the standard tier, whereby training that is done hand in hand without the full burden, financial, time or otherwise, falling on some of those smaller venues. And it's that kind of detail which I think could turn what is a fundamentally sound bill into something that is both sound and increasingly effective. And of course, we also need to look at what else can be done to ensure that the plans for premises cannot be used against them. So ensuring that if those plans are disclosed, that they are not utilised by would-be attackers as part of their preparation. And of course, there is a balancing act between having best practice made public, something which would benefit smaller venues, whilst ensuring that we are not giving advantage to those that would do them harm. And also I'd ask the ministers ensure that the regulator is supportive and constructive. It is a point that she made, saying that the dispatch box is important, making sure it's really embedded in the organisation is key, because their desire should be to help venues stay safe and viable rather than look for opportunities to rush in with fining powers, which could either put businesses out of business or introduce such a fear of fine that they decide to take the easy option and close their doors, which is not something that either side of the House would wish to see. Organisations will, of course, need time to adapt and familiarise themselves with the new guidance. And on that point, I note that the new legislation is unlikely to be implemented for around 24 months after royal assent is put forward. If this is the case, and in this period, will the Right Honourable Lady give a commitment to engage with the industry via the Federation of Small Business, Live, the GLA and other bodies to ensure that we don't have a one-size-fits-all approach which might inadvertently perhaps squeeze sensible changes which could increase compliance but without increasing risk? And also, what mitigations or exemptions will she consider to protect voluntary and community venues, churches, places of worship, particularly those who have already said that the new regulations will be burdensome for them? Because it's vital that we keep thresholds and guidance under review as the legislation is implemented. Fear of regulation often incentivises owners and organisers to take the most cautious point of view rather than the most appropriate point of view, and that would be counterproductive. As you said, the terror threats are constantly evolving, and we must evolve with them. But in doing so, we must also be alive to the threat that new regulations and protections have on our everyday lives, on gatherings, on places of worship, and on business. And we should make sure that we keep proportionality in the forefront of our minds. She has made a commitment to do that. I'm grateful that she has. And in that spirit, I would like to offer the support of the opposition benches in ensuring that this legislation passes promptly through the House, is implemented in the best form possible, and that we do what we are able to ensure that tragedies, as we saw in the Manchester arena, never happen again.